يساوم على الحق أو الثوابت.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamima, and these are today's top stories. Twin bombs go off in the old city of Damascus. At least 46 people are feared dead and many more wounded. The Dutch government withdraws landing permission for the Turkish foreign minister's aircraft. President Erdogan promises retaliation against Dutch diplomatic flights. And UN humanitarian chief Stephen O'Brien says the world faces the largest humanitarian crisis since the UN was founded, with more than 20 million people in 4 countries at risk of starvation and famine. Twin bombs have killed at least 46 people, mostly Iraqi Shia pilgrims, and wounded more than 100 others in the old city of Damascus in a rare attack in the Syrian capital. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said a roadside bomb detonated as a bus passed, and a suicide bomber blew himself up in the Bab el-Saghir area, which houses several Shia mausoleums that draw pilgrims from around the world. Syria state news agency Sana reported that both of the blasts were caused by explosive devices near the Bab el-Saghir cemetery. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad says he has yet to see anything concrete from U.S. President Donald Trump over his vow to defeat ISIS, and called U.S. forces in Syria invaders because they were without government permission. In an interview with Chinese TV station Phoenix, Assad said, quote, "In theory, he still saw scope for cooperation with Trump, though practically nothing had happened in this regard." He also dismissed the U.S.-backed military campaign against ISIS in Syria, as only a few raids, he said, had been conducted locally. The UN Security Council was briefed behind closed doors on the situation in Mosul by UN Aid Chief Stephen O'Brien and UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs Kim Won-soo. That Islamic State had used chemical weapons in Mosul, where the militants are fighting an offensive by Iraqi forces to retake the city. British UN Ambassador Matthew Rycroft said the 15-member body believed that Iraq's investigation into possible chemical weapon attacks was ongoing. Let's hear him.
The members of the Security Council continue to follow and support the Iraqi operation to liberate Mosul, noting the progress made so far, including the liberation of eastern Mosul. We call on all parties to take all feasible precautions with a view to avoiding harm to civilians and civilian objects in accordance with international humanitarian law. We express our strong support for the coordinated efforts of the United Nations and the government of Iraq to address the humanitarian crisis, and we express concern over reports of possible use of chemical weapons by Daesh, and we look forward to the results of Iraq's investigation into those allegations. And on a different issue, we've reached agreement on a press statement which has now been published on Syria, offering support to Staffan de Mistura and his agenda for the next round of talks in Geneva, these 4 baskets of issues. So, on the first question on Iraq, Kim Won-soo briefed us on his own discussions with the permanent representative of Iraq, including at this point that the permanent representative of Iraq had said that there was no evidence of the use of chemical weapons as discovered so far by the government of Iraq in its investigations. But I don't think that any of us thought that that was the definitive end of this investigation, which is why I said, as we'd all agreed at the end, that we look forward to hearing more fully from the government of Iraq when they have concluded that investigation. So far is that Iran does have influence, very direct influence, on some of the parties in Syria, and it is not using that influence to bring peace. It is doing the opposite, and so we call on Iran to fulfill a much more responsible role in its region, including ensuring that the parties that are under some form of Iranian influence are pushed towards a political process, full respect for the ceasefire, full humanitarian access. This Astana process is one of the ways of getting towards a proper political process in Geneva, and the Astana group, which includes Iran, Russia and Turkey as the guarantors, has, I think, a big responsibility to make sure that the ceasefire is upheld. And so that's a good example of something which we are calling on Iran to do, to use its position as a guarantor of the Astana process to press on Hezbollah and all the others with an Iranian influence to abide by the ceasefire fully. No violations, no blockage of access, and then allow the political process to go forward under UN auspices.
And in Lebanon, the cabinet has decided to meet again on Monday in an attempt to wrap up discussions on this year's draft budget and approve a fiscal plan for the first time in 12 years. Chaired by Prime Minister Saad Hariri, the cabinet approved allocations for the Health and Public Works Ministries during its nearly 4-hour session held at the Grand Sarai. Addressing the session, Hariri congratulated the newly appointed military and security chiefs and thanked the outgoing security and military commanders, valuing their efforts throughout their terms to maintain security and stability and fight terrorism. Just a reminder that Cabinet on Wednesday approved long-awaited security and judicial appointments, including the appointment of General Joseph Aoun as Army Commander and Major General Imad Othman as Director General for the Internal Security Forces. And coming up next, South Korea braces for protests amid calls for President Park Geun-hye's arrest. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. U.S. President Donald Trump has invited Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas for a visit to the White House in the first phone call between the two leaders since Trump's inauguration on January 20th. The official Palestinian news agency Wafa said the purpose of the visit was to discuss ways to resume the Palestinian-Israeli political process. Abbas reportedly told Trump that peace was a strategic choice for the Palestinian people, which should lead to the establishment of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. The White House said Trump told Abbas he believes a peace deal between Israelis and Palestinians must be negotiated directly by both sides. The Dutch government has withdrawn landing permission for the Turkish foreign minister's aircraft, drawing the ire of President Erdogan in a dispute over campaigning for an upcoming Turkish referendum. The Dutch government said in a statement it had withdrawn the permission because of risks to public order and security caused by the proposed visit of Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu to Rotterdam. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan promised retaliation against Dutch diplomatic flights. UN humanitarian chief Stephen O'Brien says the world faces the largest humanitarian crisis since the UN was founded in 1945, with more than 20 million people in 4 countries at risk of starvation and famine. O'Brien warned the UN Security Council that without collective and coordinated global efforts, people will simply starve to death and many more will suffer and die from disease. He urged an immediate injection of funds for Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia and northeast Nigeria, plus safe access for humanitarian aid to avert a catastrophe. Let's hear him.
All counterparts promised to facilitate sustained access and respect IHL. Yet all parties to the conflict are arbitrarily denying sustained humanitarian access and politicize aid. Already, the humanitarian suffering that we see in Yemen today is caused by the parties and proxies, and if they don't change their behavior now, they must be held accountable for the inevitable famine, unnecessary deaths, and associated amplification in suffering that will follow. The situation is worse than it has ever been. The famine in South Sudan is man-made. The parties to the conflict are parties to the famine, as are those not intervening to make the violence stop. To be clear, we can avert a famine in Somalia. We have a committed, clear, new president, a humanitarian and resilience track record, a detailed plan. We're ready, despite the incredible risks and danger. We have local and international leadership. We have a lot of access. Now we need the international community, at the scale of you, the donor agencies and nations, to invest in Somalia. It's life-saving, but we do need those huge funds now. We stand at a critical point in our history. Already at the beginning of the year, we are facing the largest humanitarian crisis since the creation of the United Nations. Now, more than 20 million people across 4 countries face starvation and famine. Without collective and coordinated global efforts, people will simply starve to death. My small team met a girl displaced. All 4 countries have one thing in common: conflict. This means that we, you, have the possibility to prevent and end further misery and suffering. The UN and its partners are ready to scale up, but we need the access and the funds to do more. It is all preventable. It is possible to avert this crisis, to avert these famines, to avert these looming human catastrophes.
All eyes were on Seoul's presidential Blue House as South Koreans awaited ex-President Park Geun-hye's reaction to her impeachment and preparations to move into her private residence. Election authorities expressed concern over growing tensions in the lead-up to polls to elect a new president. While newspaper editorials called for an end to ongoing street protests. A 3rd person died in hospital today after clashes between pro-Park supporters and riot police near the Constitutional Court, which confirmed Park's impeachment. A spokesperson for the protesters supporting the court's ruling said they were demanding the arrest of their former leader.
지금 저희는 이제는
Parishioners in Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico say they support Pope Francis in considering to ordain older married men as priests in isolated communities. This comes as a shortage of clergy has prompted calls from some progressives to end the ancient tradition of celibacy for Roman Catholic priests. The Pope, however, ruled out making priestly celibacy optional to tackle the issue. Jillian Kitchener reports.
The Argentine-born Pope is giving many people in his homeland something new to consider, and for some, something to smile about. Pope Francis told a German newspaper he is willing to consider ordaining older married men as priests in isolated communities to tackle a shortage of clergy, a development that many Argentines say is logical. This woman says Francis is starting a great revolution in the church. Some progressives have called for an end to celibacy, but Pope Francis says that is not in the cards. Worshippers at Mexico's holiest site, the Basilica of Guadalupe, welcome the idea. This worshipper says allowing married men as priests will help Catholicism evolve. Parishioners in Rio de Janeiro say they feel the same. Prominent Catholics representing both progressive and conservative wings of the U.S. have also voiced support, calling the idea a practical solution.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Twin bombs go off in the old city of Damascus. At least 46 people are feared dead and many more wounded. The Dutch government withdraws landing permission for the Turkish foreign minister's aircraft. President Erdogan promises retaliation against Dutch diplomatic flights. And UN humanitarian chief Stephen O'Brien says the world faces the largest humanitarian crisis since the UN was founded, with more than 20 million people in 4 countries at risk of starvation and famine. Those are your top stories for this Saturday. I'm Linda Tamuna. Thank you all for watching.
ولن نساوم على الحق